Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber, and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today, we are going to be ranking the top 10 duos in the NBA. These lists, Logan, they always sound very fun, and then they end up being really hard and really painful, and I imagine that you feel the same way. So let's start with, who were some of the toughest cuts for you from this list?
So I think my toughest cut was a guy who's injured, and I want to preface this by saying that if they were fully healthy, I think this duo would be a lock for my top 10. I omitted Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey from my list. Like I said, at full health, I think both of these guys crack my top 10, but I wanted to go with healthy duos right now, or at least guys that are going to play. You know what I mean? Embiid's not going to be back until the playoffs, so I thought it was just wrong for me to have him here when there are healthy duos. I omitted Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. They were a very tough cut for me. I think when you look at their complete offensive value, the fact that Zion is a human bowling ball, a wrecking ball, a guy that can just exert his will on the game, it just creates easy offense. And then you have a guy that really complements him well in Brandon Ingram, who brings that perimeter game. They were a tough cut. Another great offensive duo, Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam, were a tough cut for me. Those two guys I really considered heavily, and the reason I didn't go with it, Halliburton's game can fluctuate a little bit in terms of offensive consistency. You know, if he has a bad pull-up shooting night, he's a guy that can swing from 25 and 12 a night to 7 and 9 a night, right? And that's a big factor to me. How easy can you generate your offense? How consistently can you generate your offense? I think Halliburton is a great offensive engine on the whole, but night to night, his numbers can kind of fluctuate a little bit due to pull-up shooting, and we just haven't seen Siakam and him together as long as some of these other guys. So I want a little bit bigger sample size. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams were an extremely tough cut for me. And you could say Chet Holmgren, too, for what he does defensively. I honestly think, Carson, you tell me what you think. I don't know, man. I kind of think that SGA and J-Dub / Chet, or SGA and one of those two guys is almost interchangeable at this point.
I do think it's close. I still prefer Chet's value. And I would identify him as their second best player because of how much he transforms the defensive side of the ball. But I think that they're all, like, maybe you couldn't say that J-Dub and Chet are all-star caliber right now. Like, neither of them were snubs, but they're right in that next tier. But I do think that what Chet does is more unique because of how he transforms the defensive side of the ball and how absurdly efficient and versatile he is offensively.
I agree with you, and I just think that J-Dub is imperative to this formula too, man. And I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I don't know, as it goes on, just like who really takes over that number 2 offensive role, right? Because Chet's the stalwart, the staple, the defensive anchor of this team. But I think J-Dub and him we'll figure out where they go. And then 2 more, I omitted Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. I think their team as a whole is responsible for a lot of their victories. They're a long defensive-minded team. And Paolo and Franz, maybe not the most complementary skill sets to one another. And maybe one of the biggest omissions, I mean, I really honestly didn't consider this duo. I know a lot of people would. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. This duo, as a Kings fan, you know, they just crush my soul every game I watch. Kobe White completely crapping down our throats. It's not fun. I am a Kobe White enjoyer. I very much enjoy watching Kobe White. He's a fun player. I don't enjoy watching him destroy my team the way he did. Dude, what a game. I mean, the Kings going up 21 the other night and just crumbling to Chicago was very demoralizing as a fan. And so, you know what? I don't even feel bad about not having Fox and Sabonis here. Honestly, dude, I know a lot of people, you know, I think Fox and Sabonis are one of the first duos people think of, right? At least a top 10 duo that comes to your mind because of how long they've been together. I think they'd be like the 5th off my list, dude. I think they'd be like a top half of the league duo. I don't think they'd be one of the first omissions for me, but those are the complete honorable mentions for me.
It is amazing that there's clearly more than half the league that has legitimate candidates where you're like, yeah, that's a stamped star duo. And you would think if the league weren't so overwhelmingly talented, they'd have to be top 10. But I agree with a lot of your toughest cuts. I think that Fox and Sabonis are a really great offensive duo, but I do think most of my top 10 duos here have a number 1 who is just on a different level than a De'Aaron Fox. And maybe their number 2 has a more pronounced two-way impact or is more playoff proven than a guy like Sabonis. one of the toughest cuts who you didn't mention, so I presume they are going to be on your list, is Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert. Or maybe you have Karl Anthony Towns. I think you could make a case for either one. And I do see the case because Gobert is going to anchor the defense in a way that really only he can and make you an elite unit on that end this year, the number one unit. And Ant is obviously a dynamic shot maker. I just think there's a duo in my 10 spot who maybe the second guy isn't the level of defender that Gobert is right now. And he's not because of physical maturity. But I would say he's at least on that level as an all-around player because of the huge gap in offensive skill. And then the number one is just in a different tier. It's tough to make this list. It really is if you don't have a guy who is like stamped top 10. And honestly, my toughest cut, who I know is going to be on your list, they do have one of those stamped top 10 guys. But I think there are teams who at this stage have a better number two than this guy. Steph Curry and Draymond Green are my first cut. Logan's mind is blown. His mind is blown. I have SGA and Chet above them. And the reason for that is basically that I think, wow, Logan's mind is blown by
wow.
This. Yeah. Where do you have them? You probably have them number two, huh?
Oh my gosh, Carson, I can't believe you.
I just think SGA and Steph to me are legitimately on the same level as basketball players right now. You could argue either one for them in terms of who's better. I think it honestly depends on which archetype you prefer for building your team. And then I still love Draymond. I'm still high on Draymond. I think he's a top 50 player, but I do think that Chet is slightly better at this point because Draymond, yes, is still bringing you more defensive value, but Chet is a highly switchable big. He is one of the league's elite rim protectors. Like, he is a huge reason that OKC has been elite defensively this year. And then the gap in offensive skill is significant, dude. Like, Chet is one of the most efficient scorers with any volume in the league. He is one of the most versatile offensive bigs. Elite roll man, huge target around the rim, elite popper. The guy runs pick and roll with good efficiency. He isolates with good efficiency. He's a good playmaker. Like, he's just a problem offensively in a way that Draymond is honestly not all that close to right now. So it's a slim margin between the two of them, but I think of that offensive gap between Chet and Draymond, you just can't deny what OKC is doing right now. Like, these two are propelling such consistently elite results with such versatile impacts. They complement each other so well. SGA and Chet, I think one day will probably be number one on this list, but right now I do have them at 10.
I am simply shocked and appalled right now. I cannot believe that Steph and Draymond got booted off your list. And I do think SGA and Chet make a really good case for this. And the beautiful thing about Oklahoma City is it really is a conglomerate of guys that really work together. And that is why I think that eventually this team will win championships. I think it's an inevitability at this point. Having three offensive stars that work together, J-Dub, SGA, and Chet, having a great perimeter guy that can take on big wings, Lou Dort, they all work together. And the beauty of the offense is that with these guys, everybody's so offensively skilled. Lou Dort, not super skilled, but he's shooting that pill well this year. They can run legitimate 5 out where it's just easy, flowing, it's open. There's a ton of space for everybody to operate in, and they just move really well within one another. I do have Steph and Draymond higher on this list. I will get into my specifics and why. There's just a level of faith that I have in that Warriors duo, and the thing that really propels, again, I'll get into my bigger spiel about them. It's the synergy and how well that Draymond and Steph truly complement each other. I think it's really rare that you see two guys fit so well together as puzzle pieces. And I'm not saying that SGA and Chet don't. I think Dre's a better defender than Chet still at this point. That matters to me. Steph is still a number one top-tier offensive superstar that I want on a playoff run. I do agree. It's close between him and SGA, but and I've just seen it too many times. That's the thing that really blows my mind that you don't have them on the list, is that we've seen this duo win so many championships, have so much playoff success. I mean, you can talk about Steph and Clay as the greatest shooting duo of all time. Steph and Dre are one of the greatest duos, point blank, period, of all time. So just legacy-wise, it just kind of shocks me that you two, as a Warriors fan, don't have them on the list. That blows my mind.
It's just not a legacy conversation. I do have the utmost faith in them, and I do think that there is a maturity and obviously an all-time playoff resume between the two of them. But when I think about these skill sets right now, again, if you want to say, hey, I prefer what Steph does with his off-ball gravity, how he just transforms how a defense has to try to cover you, and still the blinding efficiency that he scores with there, the plus playmaking, I get all of it. But SGA is unbelievable as a pure scorer of the basketball. He's having a historic year. He's on pace, Logan, to have the most 30-point games in a season since Michael Jordan in 1988. That floor that he has, because he is going to get to his spots. We've talked about it. He is the best rim pressuring guard in the league, leads all guards in restricted area makes, and is also the best short mid-range shot maker with an unmatched variety of counters there. The combination of physicality and body control and craftiness as a ball handler, every move he has in his bag, like, you just can't stop him. So it's really close between the two of them. And then I do think that Chet is just on a different level of offensive value versus a Draymond Green at this point. And their pick and roll synergy is awesome. SGA scores with 91st percentile efficiency out of pick and roll. Chet finishes with 79th percentile efficiency. They're an awesome transition duo. SGA is the number 2 transition scorer in basketball. Chet is 3rd in transition points per game among centers. They can invert things at times. Like, you're just constantly compromised if you're trying to guard these two playing off of each other in a way that Draymond doesn't threaten a defense. And again, they're driving a dominant team. Like, the Thunder have a plus 10 net rating when these two are out on the floor together. The Warriors this year, even with Draymond and Steph, it's a plus 3 net rating. Like, I just think there's a reason that the Thunder are the 1 seed behind this duo. And yeah, they have a good supporting cast, but if you looked on paper before this year, I don't think you would say there's a huge gap between these supporting casts. Like, I legitimately think these guys complement each other perfectly. There's a special combination of tier 1, number 1 offensively, and elite two-way big that is very rare, regardless of age. So I would take them.
Yeah, and I'll put a lot of respect on SGA. Who were they playing the other night, Carson? They played L.A. Was it Phoenix where they closed them out down the stretch? Because Nurk was big body and Chet on the glass, but dude, down the stretch, I was watching that game with one of my roommates, and SGA just doesn't miss. You know, it's like
it's ridiculous.
It doesn't make sense. Like, he's taking these ridiculously tough shots, and they just always fall. Like, we're sitting there flabbergasted. I mean, it's literally 3 or 4 possessions straight in a row, faking the drive to the paint, slamming on the brakes, right in between the elbow and the basket. Boom. Yeah. It's money. He's just not going to miss. So I don't really have an issue with that. My number 10 is Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert, and it was a real debate for me between do I take Karl Anthony Towns or do I take Gobert? Cat is having a really great offensive season, and I think that's kind of getting lost a little bit. 22 points per game, efficient from the field, efficient from behind the arc, more well-rounded. There's just a level, and I think that's just something about Cat, Carson. I think Cat needed a number 1. You know what I mean? I think he needed a guy to alleviate the pressure, where I think that, I don't know if it's a mentality thing, if it's an attitude thing. I think Cat needed a guy that could take over and be the guy and let him be the offensive number 2. The reason that I went with Gobert over Cat is because Gobert can single-handedly transform a defense, and he has. I thought it was one of the worst trades ever. It has not been that. Gobert has been a home run hitter, and again, the defensive togetherness of Minnesota is something that you can attribute to the entire team. Ironically, going with Rudy Gobert is something that is going to limit them from being higher on this list too, just because he is limited as an offensive player. And Anthony Edwards, at the end of the day, does have his limitations as well offensively, right? Like, I can't overstate how important Mike Conley is to balancing this entire offense out, getting this thing to go, how important Karl Anthony Towns is to helping ease the offense. But Edwards is special. He is one hell of a rim pressure. He's actually pressuring the rim at the lowest rate of his career this season, but he's diversified his shot palette and become even more of a deadly scorer from all around the court, right? Early on, Edwards was near 40% at the rim in terms of frequency of shot. He takes about 31% of his shots at the rim now. He's leaning more into the mid-range, more into three-point shooting, but I really think that helps. Like, Ant's just becoming a complete bucket from all over the court. And I do think Ant is a number 1, and I don't think he's reached his ceiling yet. I think this is a guy, Carson, that at his apex is going to be one of the best rim pressurers, one hell of a playmaker, one of the best pull-up jump shooters. I just think it's all going to come together for Ant. And so that's why he can't be higher now, because it does scare me, right? Like, Gobert's limited as an offensive player, and Ant, if that pull-up jumper leaves him or something, he can be a little bit limited, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what stops him from climbing higher on my list, is they're just offensively limited in the way that other duos aren't. And that being said, they have a higher defensive ceiling. It was close between them and SGA and Chet. I think Gobert is just a more impactful defender. It's kind of the same reason I went with Draymond and Steph. And then Ant, I would take SGA over Ant right now, like 1-1, but I just think Gobert is a better defender. That one's really tough, man. The 10 spot was by far the toughest one for me to debate between. Really, I debated with Ant and Gobert and all of these guys. Gobert's defensive floor is ultimately what cracks them on my list, though. I just really value a guy that can single-handedly transform one side of the floor. And honestly, that goes for a lot of the duos high up on my list, Carson. If you have a defensive number one and an offensive number one, I really value that. Two guys that can transform your team on both sides of the floor. That's very important to me, and that is ultimately the crux of why Ant and Gobert are number 10 on my list.
It's really interesting because if you want to say, I think that Gobert is a better player right now than Chet Holmgren, I totally see that. Again, I'm not sure that I agree. I think there's no question that he is a better defender who's more transformative, really in every way. He's a more elite pure rim protector, but he's a much better rebounder. He's more physically equipped to hold up. I don't know that Chet's offensive edge doesn't offset that, but whatever you may think the gap between Gobert and Chet is, I just don't see how it's bigger than the gap between SGA and Ant. Like, that is still a big gap, man. And I know that you're really high on Ant and what he can be, but we're looking at guys who are in different tiers of player right now. We're looking at immediate MVP candidate, very arguably top 5 player on the planet, unstoppable scorer night after night after night. That's SGA, compared to ascending superstar who you see the flashes, but right now is like a fringe top 15 kind of player. That's Ant. And you talk about the diversity of the shot profile. That's a huge difference to me. SGA, we talked about this. He is the most efficient pull-up jump shooter out of the top 20 guys in terms of volume there in the NBA. He's only behind Tyrese Halliburton. Whereas Ant, I was optimistic because of what we saw playing with Team USA that he would really improve as a mid-range shooter this year, and he just hasn't. He's under 35% for mid-range. SGA shoots 54% from 10 to 14 feet. He shoots 57% on step back too. So it is the difference of, okay, you have two great rim pressuring guards who do it in different ways, but then who is more capable of beating you with that over-the-top skilled shot making? It's SGA by a mile. Who is more consistently going to punish you with good playmaking and good decision making? It's SGA by a whole lot. That's just where I can't rationalize it. I see Gobert over Chet. I do not see Gobert being over Chet by a wider margin than SGA's over Ant.
The distinction for me isn't between SGA and Ant. I wholeheartedly agree on everything you said about SGA over Ant. I think they're in different tiers of players right now. SGA has cemented himself as a tier 1 superstar. I have a little sour taste in my mouth from the other night watching Chet get babied by Jusuf Nurkic. And for me, that's a component in this too, is it's like a lot of these guys, do they have one major weakness that I think you can really attack? Yes. Chet Holmgren against a grown man center can get bodied. I mean, I think you're right. Like, you can argue that Chet's offensive brilliance outweighs what Gobert does, but to me, Gobert's strength and size and grown man rebounding advantage kind of negates that. I just don't want a guy with as big a red flag as Chet. Like, I think Chet's great. I think Chet's going to improve too. I think he's a dream number 2 that you could ask for. And I think as his frame fills out, like, Chet gained 10 pounds this offseason. And I don't want to let that, like, a lot of people, oh my God, Chet's so skinny.
He's up to 120.
It's hard, man. It is hard for skinny guys to put on weight, man. And so 10 pounds is a lot of weight to gain in 1 year.
Speaking from experience there.
Dude, let me tell you, man. Let me tell you. It's hard for skinny guys to put on weight, dude. So I sympathize with that issue, but it is still the biggest red flag. And I think when you're looking at all of these duos, it's the biggest glaring weakness. I mean, you could say the same thing about a guard that doesn't defend, but it's a little more glaring when it's your center and it's the guy responsible for holding down the interior. And so because of that advantage that I think that big physical centers hold over Chet, that's just why I can't put him on my list. I agree, there's a major gap between SGA and Ant right now, but that just scars me, man. And I think that is still the component that could get Oklahoma City bounced in a playoff series, and that's why I can't put him on my list.
So I am out on OKC as a genuine title contender this year because of their slightness and because how I think they struggle against those super big physical centers. But I want to be clear, that's not just a Chet thing. I should say those big physical front lines, because that's the problem. It's that their quote-unquote 4 is Jalen Williams. Their quote-unquote 3. I mean, none of these guys have positions, right? But the second biggest dude on the floor is going to be Josh Giddey, a slight wing. It's going to be SGA, a slight wing. It's going to be Jalen Williams, a slight wing. Like, that's where I think it's a collective problem. Chet, because of his length, really can hold up in a lot of these matchups. Not so much on the glass, but just in terms of, it's not like guys just lick their chops going up against Chet, because it's the same thing as Wemby. They may be slighter, but they're so much longer. Their timing is so great. Their instincts are so great. The problem really is like a Nikola Jokic. And it's these collective front lines where it's, okay, you have Aaron Gordon and MPJ, and you're 4 inches taller than us and 30 to 50 pounds heavier than us at every position. I mean, Jokic is literally 90 pounds heavier than Chet. That's where I worry about it. I just don't so singularly put it on Chet. And I do still think that they're exceptional. That's just a specific matchup where they're going to have some real problems. The Lakers, as we've seen, the Lakers have kind of owned the Thunder this year because it's a really problematic matchup. But I think the one final distinction I would make before we move on is, you said that you really like your duos to have an offensive number one and a defensive number one. And I just don't view Ant as being an offensive number one in the sense that these other guys are. I think that there's an inconsistency and an immaturity there that when you're comparing him to SGA, Steph Curry, any number of these guys we can talk about, like, he's going to grow to that level, but he's not there just yet. And again, you talk about Chet having an exploitable weakness with his slightness.
Well, Gobert, I was going to say,
Gobert is just 100%, flat out offensively
100%. That's why it is so close between these two, man.
Yeah. All right, let's keep it moving. Who do you have in that 9 spot?
Oh, man. I don't want to do this. I don't want to make this take.
Oh.
I do not think people are going to like this for a multitude of reasons. At number 9, I have Jayson Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis.
Same here, brother. Let's go.
Let's rip the Band-Aid off, Carson. Nerd Sesh country, let's ride. All right. So let's get one elephant out of the room. Why did I go with Kristaps Porzingis over Jaylen Brown? First off, I think that Kristaps Porzingis just can single-handedly transform your defense a little more. And I don't want to put him in a Gobert tier or anything like that. Kristaps is still freakishly long. If you put him at the 4, you put him at the 5, he is super impactful as a defender. He is a thick dude. He's hard to move, and he's gonna rebound well. Like, he's not an elite rebounder, but Kristaps is just more impactful defensively wholeheartedly than Jaylen Brown. And you look at the numbers and you'd go, oh, well, Jaylen Brown averages 22 a night. Why is he not on your list? You know, that's a difference of 5 points per game. It's just not that simple to me, man. I just think Porzingis is the more skilled offensive player. Jaylen Brown, his shot fluctuates. His handle fluctuates. And that's the final thing to me about Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown versus Jayson Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis. I just don't think Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown complement each other all that well. And, I mean, that's a conversation we've been having for 2 years now. I mean, since the finals run. This offseason, I said that the Celtics should explore trading Jaylen Brown for Damian Lillard. You know, I just thought that, if you told me that at the end that they could get Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, I think that I'm probably taking Holiday and Porzingis over just getting Dame for JB, because you get to keep JB in that scenario. So I think they did the right thing, but it was all about getting guys that worked together and worked really well. And so Tatum isn't a perfect offensive number one either, and I have major issues with him. The fact that Tatum is never going to look to weaponize his playmaking as much as he should. The fact that Tatum is probably never going to pressure the rim as much as I think he should, right? He's kind of a hard guy to fit alongside, you know what I mean? Tatum's going to do his own thing offensively. He's not really going to, he's not super malleable as an offensive player. And so those are limiting factors, but Kristaps has been the most efficient post scorer in all of basketball this year. He's a better floor spacer. Again, I think he's more skilled. I think he's more impactful defensively. So between him and Jaylen Brown, it's not really a question for me. It's where do you go with Tatum and Porzingis? And the reason they can't be higher, again, I think when you're looking at offensive number ones, a lot of like what you said about Anthony Edwards, Carson, I think applies to Jayson Tatum. And it's not apples to apples. I think Tatum's a straight up better scorer, but I think they're limited in a lot of similar ways. Their shot selection, their diet, their play style in terms of how they're just not elite playmakers. And availability is a little bit of a slight concern for me. Anytime we're talking about Porzingis, and availability is a huge concern with my next duo as well, a reason that I cannot have them any higher than I do, despite my confidence in their abilities. Availability always has to be a concern. And I'm sorry, Boston. Like, I just hate anytime we talk about the Celtics or anytime we talk about Tatum, and it's like, oh, Tatum needs to be in the MVP conversation. He needs to be in the top 3 player in the world conversation. He's just not there for me. And there's a lot of other guys, a lot of other duos I just have more faith in. The Boston Celtics are a great basketball team. We're ranking duos right now, and I'm really comfortable with them at number 9, man. I just look at their limitations like other guys just have better scoring skill sets, more complementary skill sets, or they're just more impactful. And so I don't have an issue with not having these guys higher. It's hard because I know that Boston fans are rabid and crazy, but they're going to come in at number 9 for me, man.
I think you hit on a key point towards the end there, which is actually just the entire premise here. We're ranking duos. Boston is one of the most overwhelmingly dominant basketball teams that we've seen this century, at the very least in the regular season. And I think is up there for the most talented starting 5 top to bottom that we've seen this century. It's just ridiculous. But their whole thing is that you can argue who their second best player is on any given night. And that's why I have them here. It's funny because you would probably expect, like, I've been more critical than Tatum of a lot of people, and I have gushed praise about Kristaps Porzingis more than a lot of people. But at the end of the day, the reason they're 9 isn't primarily on Tatum, who I think is a top 10 player, who, yeah, maybe isn't in that tier 1 of number 1 guys, but I think can go toe-to-toe with the guy who I have in my number 8 spot as the number 1, who I think is really, frankly, a better basketball player consistently. It's about the fact that KP as a number 2 is like a fringe top 30 player in the NBA. I'd say he's a top 30 player in the NBA. And there's just other guys who are better in terms of the number 2s. That's really what it comes down to. And if you wanted to argue Jalen, I think there's a case. I don't really think there's a case for Drew or Derek White. I probably shouldn't have said that there's, 4 guys you could argue are their number 2, but those guys are still awesome.
Yeah.
And it is that collective impact that makes them so dominant. Like Tatum and KP have a plus 12 net rating when they're on the floor together, but that's kind of the same for any prominent duo among the Celtics starters. Like, they just are going to blow you out as long as they have 4 of those guys out on the floor. Like, even when KP's been out, the Celtics still crush people. They crush people whenever they're missing one of those guys because they're just so stacked. I would take him over Jalen because of basically what you laid out. He's the most efficient 20-point per game scorer in basketball, and he has been top 2 consistently throughout this year in terms of his effectiveness as a rim protector, just when you look at opponent field goal percentage at the rim when he's the primary defender. So he's anchoring an elite defense. Offensively, he is the perfect complementary piece. Crazy efficient roller, crazy efficient popper, awesome floor spacer as a spot-up guy, and just a nightmare to guard in the post. His artistry there, his physicality there, his shot making, it's overwhelming. And if he can ever find a switch, he's going to obliterate you. But even against most bigs, his size advantage and his shot making is just too much to deal with. So I think that unicorn skill set, as we've called KP for years, unicorn, is more distinct and more valuable than what Jalen does, even though Jalen's awesome. But just being that sort of second volume scoring wing with decent efficiency, with mediocre playmaking, with plus defense, but not really transformative defense, can't have the impact that KP does as that anchor. Give me KP. I think he's the more valuable basketball player here. And really, the one that I struggled comparing this duo to is Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, who I have 1 spot above them. And this is a challenge because I think the ceiling for these two is maybe higher. I think that Tatum's ceiling is higher than Jimmy Butler's. I think that if he gets in the mode of, okay, I'm going to consistently impose myself physically, pressure the rim, not let defenses off the hook taking tough pull-up threes, attack mismatches out of the post. If he gets in a good groove as a playmaker and is making good decisions, like, he just has more natural gifts than Jimmy Butler. In terms of how they've performed in the playoffs as number 1 so far, though, I would give Jimmy a slight edge over the last couple years. And then, as much as I love KP, and I think he has a legitimate offensive edge over Bam Adebayo because he's just so much more skilled as a shot maker. He can impose himself physically a bit more. Bam has the playmaking edge, but that doesn't offset the scoring edge that KP has. I think that Bam's defensive edge is more significant. And consistently in these playoff environments, we have seen him make a case for the best defender on the planet. If you want AD, actually I want AD, so that's a very good case to make. But his switchability is unparalleled. And if you just think about last year, some of the stuff that he did, making Giannis so uncomfortable, just being able to physically match up in single coverage in a way that very few guys can, giving Julius Randle fits. And again, he just disturbs all of your actions because a lot of these teams run pick and roll and their whole thought is, okay, we're going to be able to get a mismatch or we're going to be able to get clean looks out of drop. And when you have a guy who can switch onto those guards and legitimately, I know that it's such a cliche of people saying, oh, this guy can guard 1 through 5 and they really can't. If there's one dude on the planet that can, and if there's one dude over the last half decade that can, it's Bam Adebayo.
He's been the best.
He's unbelievable, and he transforms series with his defense in a way that's very rare. But he does have that tendency at times in these playoff environments to struggle offensively. Like last year, he was under 18 a game in the playoffs on 53% true shooting. And there are those stretches where if his little floaters and if his little short mid-range jumpers aren't falling, then you're just like, bam. I mean, you can't get a bucket for the life of you. He can score 10 points on 4 of 14 shooting. That's not out of the question. But there's a reason that this duo, without great supporting cast alongside them, without big names alongside them, have made 2 finals in the last 4 years. And I think Heat fans are probably going to be infuriated that I even have them at number 8. I do think there are teams that can create more effortless offense with the duos. I do think there are teams that have more dominant number 1s than Jimmy, and that's really the case for everybody up above them. But I do still take them over Tatum and KP. And to be clear, the Celtics are a way better team. But the Heat's third best player is Jaime Jaquez, and the Celtics is Jaylen Brown, and then it's Drew Holiday, and it's Derek White. Like, it's just a different level of basketball team, far more than it is a different level of a duo.
Yeah, I have Miami way higher, so we're gonna get into that.
Okay.
I don't disagree with some of the fundamental things that you laid out. Is there limitations? But Miami's consistent defensive ceiling is unparalleled, and when Jimmy gets into that mode, man, like you talk about the difference between Tatum and KP, dude. Butler and Adebayo just have this mentality, man, this attitude that when they can get in there, man, it's something that Tatum and KP I just don't think can tap into. I have a very, very skilled duo, a very, very talented duo at my next spot, and it pains me a little bit to have them this low because I think that they're more skilled than my ranking suggests, and I think their ceiling is higher than where I rank them, but availability is a major concern always with these two. And so at number 8, I have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and I'm very high on these guys. Carson and I just ranked our top 10 scorers. Kawhi Leonard was very high on our list, and by far, more than anybody else in the comment section, it seemed like people took a major issue with us having Kawhi Leonard as high as we did. I'll go ahead and reiterate. I'll explain. He's efficient basically out of every action that you can run with him on the basketball court. Anything, if it from DHOs to isolation possessions to pick and roll as the ball handler to spot ups, Kawhi Leonard is super elite. He's one of the most physically imposing guys in the league too. He's super strong. He just gets to his spots, and it's tough, man. You know, I think that list is harder to do now, Carson, than it has ever been in NBA history. Like, watch the end of a basketball game nowadays. There are so many talented guys on the court at all times. I just feel blessed to watch it. If it's Kawhi Leonard and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander going toe-to-toe, and SGA is nailing every midi, and Kawhi's just off that night. If it's KD and Steph going toe-to-toe, whoever it is, it's like, I don't know how this game is going to end because there's so much basketball skill and talent on the court, and it's just awesome. And so that list was very hard to make. That being said, I still have Kawhi as one of those guys. Yeah. And I think Paul George is a dream number 2, man. What he does is the second guy and how they complement each other. Like, Kawhi and PG have both grown so much as legitimate playmakers. And you can throw any perimeter tandem at these two, and they are going to be able to lock them up. And this is not a skill thing. Like, if I could get these guys fully healthy, I think Kawhi and PG are probably 6 on my list. Not that much higher, but 2 spots higher. Availability and health is still a concern for me, and that is still something that, like I talk about Chet leaving a sour taste in my mouth, watching Nurkic grab 30 boards on him, Kawhi and PG leave a sour taste in my mouth when I got to watch Russell Westbrook go out there and try to will the Clippers to 40 points by himself. And I got to watch Norm Powell and the B team try to will this team to victory because these guys aren't available, and they have consistently not been available. And I have to factor that into my computation. So skill and complementary skill set and talent and ability don't really factor into any of this with Kawhi and PG. When these guys are healthy, I have the utmost faith in them. But I just can't. I can't put a duo that isn't as healthy in crucial moments, higher on this list. And I hate to hold that against them, but I have to.
That's fair. I did not consider availability for my list, so you mentioned that you don't have Embiid and Maxey on here at all. I actually have Embiid and Maxey at number 7. They are the next on my list. But I do have Kawhi and PG at 6, and that's the thing. I think they get underrated in terms of how great they are when healthy just because of availability. When they play together over these 4 years that we've seen, or 5 years now. This is the 5th year.
Isn't that crazy?
It is really sad, honestly, because we've seen them healthy for a playoff run and a half, basically. But that's the thing. Like, they frankly should have made the Western Conference Finals. Then they did make the Western Conference Finals. I think would have gone to the finals if Kawhi doesn't get hurt. And, I mean, PG still single-handedly made that series really competitive against the Suns. Last year, they punched the Suns in the mouth in Game 1, but Kawhi is done for the series after Game 2. Like, they have been inevitably elite when these two are on the floor. And if you are factoring in availability, I get it. But that's the thing for me. It's like, some people will say, okay, well, Jimmy and Bam just have so much more proven a playoff resume together. And I would say, well, Kawhi and PG have led to significantly more regular season success. And the only reason that we haven't seen them go on a deep playoff run together is because they haven't been healthy for it. When they have been out there, they have played as one of the elite teams in basketball, gone toe-to-toe with the best in the toughest conference. This year, when they are on the floor together, the Clippers have a plus 12.7 net rating. And the collective shot making is just incomprehensible. PG is 40% from deep on 8 threes a game. His combination of catch and shooting, pull-up shooting, what he does curling off screens. It's unbelievable how complete his three-point arsenal is. Kawhi, who, I had as my number 3 scorer when you're talking about a playoff run, because I don't care about volume. In the playoffs, we see the volume. He gives you 30 every damn night on crazy efficiency because he gets to his spots, and he is an impossibly great pull-up shooter. This year, he's 52, 43, 89 splits. That's just what he averages. Like, it's really a one-of-one combination of strength and pure pull-up shooting, 3-level scoring. Both these guys are capable playmakers. They're still legitimately plus defenders. And when I compare this duo to the Celtics duo or to the Heat's duo, I do think that PG is honestly the strongest number 2 of all of them, but I also think that Kawhi is the best number 1, and I think he's up a level, even from a Jimmy Butler. As much as I respect Jimmy, last 2 playoff runs, he's 27, 7, and 5 on 58% true shooting. That's Jimmy. That's awesome. Kawhi just reaches a different level as a scorer in terms of both volume and efficiency. And I do think that PG is kind of eternally underrated, man. As a number 2, he does so many great things. His willingness, again, to play off ball. He's a 90th percentile spot-up guy. He fits so well alongside 2 other like lead ball handler kind of guys with both Kawhi and James Harden. But then when he does create, PG is an 83rd percentile pick and roll ball handler, 73rd percentile isolation. He can attack mismatches out of the post, scores with 88th percentile efficiency there. It's just that combination of size and athleticism, even though he's not at his peak, and sometimes I wish he pressured the rim a little bit more. He's still a good athlete with unbelievable ball handling and fluidity and pure shot making. I think these two are great, and I think that they just consistently make you a great basketball team when they're healthy.
They were really hard to rank, and I do think there's an offensive gap between a duo like them and Jimmy and Bam.
Oh, yeah.
But the availability thing and then the defensive gap, I just know what Jimmy and Bam are going to give me defensively when it comes playoff time. And I love Apex Predator Jimmy. When Jimmy locks in, man, I mean, when he turns into... I mean, and he's doing it again, man. We can't act surprised anymore. We can't even... And that's why I'm not saying they're disrespecting them, because I think that, you know, it's not a bad ranking. I think anywhere between 8 and 5 is about right for Jimmy and Bam. And, again, the league is so talented. I can see this list going a myriad of ways, but I just have such a level of faith of them being great on the game's biggest stages. And I think Jimmy's kicking it up a notch as we speak, man.
I get it. I just don't think that defensive gap, although it is there, the Clippers still have a very good defensive duo here, offsets the offensive gap. I really think that I undersold the Clippers consistently throughout this year. And no, they're not my favorite out west. I think there's a real gap between them and Denver. But I do think that offensive production from them is so consistently elite. And that's very much the case with Harden. But that was the case before Harden, when it was these two shouldering the lead playmaking load and bringing the ball up the floor like every possession, creating everything. You put shooters around them, you're going to have a dominant offense. And I don't want to lose sight of that, because we've kind of become numb to it. And I think we've kind of maybe forgotten because of the injuries and whatnot. But they are special. My number 7, though, and this was a really hard duo to rank, is Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. The reason I have them this high, even though Jimmy and Bam are obviously more proven in that playoff environment, I just think these two have the potential to run through a playoff field in a way that even Jimmy and Bam don't. Because, again, it comes down to the gap in terms of unstoppable number one. And Joel Embiid has the potential to be unstoppable. If he holds up as the sort of shot maker we've seen in the regular season, when you combine that with his physical dominance, there's just nothing that you can do. That's why the guy scores 35 a night on insane efficiency. And these two, when they were on the floor, made the Sixers like the best team in basketball this year. I know that Embiid sat a couple tough road games against good opponents, but they were 26-7 when these two played. They had a plus 12 net rating, and that was without a great supporting cast. That was coming into the year with questions of like, okay, how do they compensate for the lack of James Harden? It didn't matter. They were blowing everybody out. And I do think they have a really elite two-man game. I think that they have great synergy out of pick and roll. Embiid is such a terrifying popper. And at all times, he just demands so much defensive attention that it really enables Maxey to shine as a number two option. We've seen him struggle a lot more when you ask him to be a legit number one lead guy. And that's one of the reasons that I can't have this duo higher. I think that Maxey is clearly a weaker number two than anyone who I have above them on this list when you're looking at the second guys in these duos. But he's still an awesome pick and roll shot maker, awesome in transition, awesome spot up guy. I am the longest time Tyrese Maxey advocate that there is, but his efficiency without Embiid takes a hit to 54% true shooting, whereas with Embiid, it's at 60% true shooting. So I don't think that he matches up to a lot of these lead guards who we would compare him to. But at the end of the day, we're assessing duos. And when Embiid is out there, because of how much attention the man consumes, he does score with this elite volume and pretty darn good efficiency. Maxey does. So because of Maxey as a number two not holding up to some of these other guys, because they aren't playoff proven, because Embiid still has to show me he can hold up to this regular season in the playoffs, I can't have them higher than this. But the ceiling is so overwhelmingly high. When you're just talking about a duo, that's the thing, right? We know what the ceiling for the Boston Celtics is, and it's monumental. That's with both Jayson Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis. When the Sixers had these two out there, they were dominating regular season games at the same level that the Celtics were, without nearly the third through fifth kind of options. So that's why I think that I have to give them their respect and have them in the 7 spot.
I mean, they were top 10 in net rating along with the Celtics for a long time this year.
To be clear, that's top 10 in a single season all time.
Ever.
Logan is talking about.
Ever,
They were destroying people.
It's a good take, man. And I mean, when Embiid is healthy, you are getting one of the best rim protectors and deterrents. You're getting a defensive anchor along with one of the best offensive number ones, a guy that can physically impose himself on the game and dominate. Again, we haven't seen it in the playoffs. And I think health, that concern is a component, but I think I agree with you, man, that when Maxey, and if we can get them on that stage, I don't know about running through the East, but I can see them making a push. I just want to see them healthy, because that's another component of this, and something that was really important to me when ranking the elite of the elite, and this is a component in my number 7 group who I'm not very excited to get into here, how they complement each other. And Embiid and Maxey complement each other exceptionally well. Do you have anything else you want to get on those guys?
Just real quick, I don't necessarily mean to say that they would run through the East, because I think there are better teams, but I think if you put an equivalently talented supporting cast, right?
Okay.
I think in terms of what they can do as a duo, the ceiling that they can reach, where Embiid is giving you legitimately 35 a night on great efficiency. I think he's capable of doing that in the playoffs. We haven't seen it, but again, if he can maintain his shot making, like, he is completely unguardable when he is knocking down those mid-range jumpers like he does in the regular season. Then what Maxey can do, or especially if you don't have a good guard who can really give him trouble at the point of attack, like, he could be giving you close to 30 a night on good efficiency. That sort of ceiling, it's always going to be harder than that for the Heat. And what the Heat do, it is going to be more about the defensive side of the ball, but it's going to be so much more of a grind offensively. If these two are clicking and healthy in a playoff environment, like, I can just see them putting up astronomical numbers and propelling really dominant team offense, because that's what they've done in the regular season this year. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. New customers who deposit $5 or more can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,000 back in a bonus bet.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code NERDS. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,000 if your first bet loses. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code NERDS. The crown is yours.
Okay, Who do you have in that 6th spot?
Well, I haven't gotten to my number 7 yet.
Your 7th spot.
Another duo that has put up major offensive performances, man. I can see anybody. God, the top 7 was tough. I can see anybody putting this group anywhere between 2 and 7. I have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, and
whoa.
Yeah, I know. They're a complete scoring arsenal, right? You got 2 of the best scorers in the NBA. The reason that I don't have them higher, one is availability concerns. Carson is shocked.
We both have had a moment like that.
One is availability. Kevin Durant scares me a little bit in terms of what we've seen from him in the past few years. D-Book has missed some time. That's not as major a component. The thing is skill set redundancy. I don't think Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are the most complementary to one another. I don't think either of these guys single-handedly transforms your defense. So while you can reach this amazing elite offensive ceiling, I don't think that either of them can give you a high defensive ceiling. I think there's a lack of an uber dynamic offense here in terms of the shots that they generate. I think D-Book's a little better, and that's a big component of this to me is Kevin Durant's regression, and I think it's a conversation that we need to talk about a little bit more in depth. A lot of people also took offense, Carson, with our top 10 scorers list. While we had Kawhi Leonard so high, a lot of them felt that we disrespected Kevin Durant by having him so low on our list. Well, to that I would say Durant is taking just 19% of his shots at the rim this season. Granted, that's the highest mark of his career over the past 4 years since he was in Brooklyn. Over the past couple years, I mean, it's been like 4% or 5%. I mean, it's been comically low. And so I think that leap is due to the Suns' offense being a little more spaced out because you have Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. But, I mean, just watch him in the clutch, man. I don't know how you can watch KD nowadays and not see the regression. Like, he's not as quick at getting into the lane. He's not blowing by guys as effortlessly. Like, it is – offense is labored for him, man. And when you can wall him up a little more, Durant has this tendency to just get into the pull-up jumper. And I want to be clear about this. Kevin Durant is such a long and great and tall jump shooter. It's like Dirk Nowitzki pulling up over the top of an offense. It is a great shot no matter where he is shooting it because he is Kevin Durant. You know, because he is Dirk. No matter where he pulls up and shoots from on the floor, that is an efficient jump shot because he's one of the greatest shooters of all time. But at the end of the day, it's still a pull-up jumper. Like, offense is labored for Kevin Durant now. And not at the beginnings of games. The first 3, I'm not talking about the first 3 quarters. The first 3 quarters, KD can light it up and he can get to the rim and he can do it. In the fourth quarter, when games are grimy, when it is tight, when it is more of a playoff environment, offense is a little tougher for Kevin Durant. And so because of that, combined with this group's defensive shortcomings collectively, I didn't want to put them any higher. And there are other groups here that I think have worse number 2s. Kevin Durant is maybe the best number 2 on this list, man. But there are number 1s that I prefer better. And there are collective defensive ceilings that I think these duos can reach. And maybe this is short-sighted of me, Carson, and it goes against the entire thought exercise that we are doing on this podcast. Their teammates do factor into this a little bit to me. And the only reason I say that is because there's a little bit of a flag on the play. And the only reason I say this is because Durant and D-Book's co-stars are so bad and so limited offensively. Bro, at the end of the games, defenses aren't even pretending to guard these guys. They are just throwing doubles at Kevin Durant. And they are saying, hey, KD, just pass the ball to Saban Lee. Hey, KD, just kick it to Royce O'Neal, man. We're not going to let you get off anything. And I know I shouldn't be holding them against them because in this scenario we have even supporting cast, but it's like, damn, man. Like, KD can't even – their supporting casts are so bad, they can't even weaponize the fact that they have 3 of the best isolation scorers in basketball. You know what I mean? Like, it's – I don't know. That scars me a little bit too, but it's moreover than anything else, it's Kevin Durant's regression. It is the skill set redundancy, and it is the lack of a great defensive floor that I think this duo can produce. And – I believe in KD and D-Book. I think they are good enough that I think the Suns could still go on a run, even with this lackluster, bummy supporting cast. But I just think there's more complementary skill sets between guys. I think there's higher defensive floors and ceilings that these guys can reach, and there are better number 1s that I prefer than Devin Booker. And so that's why this Suns duo comes in at number 7.
So I don't totally disagree with a lot of your points. I just think you've maybe overstated the significance of some of them. At the end of the day, these are probably 2 top 10 players. We'll have to do our rankings, but I think that they're both still here. And yeah, they're both probably in that 7 to 11 range. You're not talking about tier 1 guys, and that does matter. But to me, it matters when you get into a different echelon. Like, I can't believe I'm just starting to think about some of the duos you have above them. Like, Steph and Draymond still above Book and KD. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. I don't know. And I agree with the skill set redundancy point. And I agree it is concerning how bad they've been in fourth quarters this year and how their clutch offense just hasn't been good. And they've struggled to get stops in those clutch situations. Like, they've lost a lot of games.
And they just turn the hell out of the... And they turn the ball over a ton, man.
It's been bad. But I still think you are looking at one of the most special shot-making and scoring duos we have ever seen.
Sorry, I just want to make one more point. And that's what is so hard about ranking Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, man, is all of these different factors. The fact that Bradley Beal hasn't been as healthy, and we have yet to see this trio really, get a full, big, long stretch together where everybody is healthy. And the fact that I have a really hard time separating the supporting cast from it, because I blame the turnovers too, and it's like, damn, man. Eric Gordon will try to go point Eric Gordon in transition and just toss a turnover. Or Yusuf Nurkic is bringing the ball up in transition, and he's like, yeah, man, let me fire a ball down to the paint that's going to get picked off. And it's like, guys, just get the ball to Devin Booker or Kevin Durant. Did we ever think about that? Can we get them the ball and get out of the way? The Suns' surrounding situation is so terrible and is so full of just one-dimensional or just limited role players that it really does make this so much harder to evaluate these two guys individually.
I do think that you're maybe going a little bit hard on the Suns supporting cast right now. Like, they do have good spot-up shooting, but yeah, we know that they have issues, certainly in terms of defensive ceiling and whatnot. And there is a case to be made that, these two aren't singularly going to propel you to being an elite basketball team because of their offensive overlap and because of not negative impact defensively. I think that these are both very solid defensive players, but again, they're not going to drive defensive success, and they're also not necessarily going to embrace doing all the little things and scrapping. They certainly don't have the hashtag heat culture mentality on that side of the ball. But again, they are such special shot makers. Last year's playoff run, you could argue, by the way, that we walked away from thinking, oh man, KD didn't look so great. These two combined for 63 points and 13 assists per game on nearly 65% true shooting. And they still produced really good offense. And that was without Chris Paul. And that was with at least for some of it. And that was with a worse supporting cast than they have now. So to me, there's only they might be the only duo. Maybe there's one other where you can look at this and say either one of these guys can be easily the best player on the floor in a playoff series. And that's just special to me. And I do wonder if expectations is shaping things for you a bit because the Suns are still a really good team when these two play together. They have a plus 6.3 net rating. It's not on par with some of the elite numbers that we've seen, but that's still really good. They win a high percentage of their games. They just have these concerns where maybe if you just looked at Kevin Durant and Devin Booker in a vacuum, you would say, yeah, that's 2 top 10 players. Nobody else in the NBA has that. They're the best duo in the NBA because of that. And they're not quite at that level because they don't have this huge plus defensive value and because they don't have one elite playmaker and because they don't have a really good rim pressurer, right? But again, it's versus the expectations of if we were just looking at these names on paper, maybe that should be the number one duo. So I still have them in my top 5 because I think they're still amazing. They're just maybe not quite as amazing as we hoped. And I do think that KD has taken a little bit of a step back. But again, I think maybe you're overstating it a little bit. The guy still gives you 28 a night on 64% true shooting. That's ridiculous. He's just not what he has been. And that's why I had him in the back half of my top 10 scorers in the NBA today instead of firmly in that top 5 and that top 3 where he'd been for more than a decade.
Yeah, and the next duo, Carson, that I have on this list honestly overlap with a lot of the same concerns that I have with this duo. I have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving in my number 6 spot, and I'll go ahead and I'll reiterate some of it. Overlapping skill sets in terms of on-ball dominant guys, but I think that Kyrie complements Luka Doncic a little better. He's a little more willing to play the off-ball stuff, and it's a little disingenuous, too, to D-Book and KD, too, because I do think D-Book's a good cutter, but Kyrie's just a little more willing to do that role and to play that. But neither of these guys are great defensively, despite the narrative that Luka Doncic is the best defender on planet Earth. That is developing.
Hashtag Depoy Luka.
Yeah, I mean, he's up there in deflections, man. He's up there in points per possession on isolations. Like,
post up.
So, Luka's a better defender. He has improved. And I think Kyrie Irving, if you just look at the tape night to night, good hands, smart IQ, like he's playing hard. But again, neither of these guys are ever, with Kyrie's sleight of frame, with Luka's foot speed, like neither of these guys are going to be good defenders. And when you're comparing them to a Kawhi or PG, there's a different level there. Neither of them may be great defenders. But the reason that they are above KD and D-Book to me, the reason they are above Kawhi and Paul George overwhelmingly is just because of one guy, and that is Luka Doncic. The fact that I just have a level of faith that Luka Doncic is going to make you a great offense. And he is one of the best scorers on planet Earth, and he is going to get whatever the hell he wants, whenever he wants. He's going to control. He's going to dictate the game. Like, moreover than anybody else, there are three guys, maybe four, that control and dictate the game more than anybody else in the league today. And I think that is Jokic. I think that's Luka. I think that's SGA. And I think that's Steph, man. In terms of just, they just got the game in the palm of their hands, it feels like, more than anybody else. And that's a big component of this for me. And Kyrie having a second guy that is that good offensively really matters to me. But like I said, for every duo above these guys, and I think Luka's probably the best number one out of the majority of the guys above this list, I really heavily value having a number one offensively and a number one defensively. And neither of these guys are going to transform my defense, and that matters to me. I want complete impact over a basketball game. I want two guys that can do that for me, or that are just so overwhelmingly great in, one thing that they're going to propel their duo higher. And so because of their defensive limitations, that's ultimately why I can't have them higher. But Luka is so great as a singular force, and Kyrie is so great as a number two offensively, then I'm going to take them. I have more faith in the Mavericks making a deep playoff push with Luka and Kyrie than I do Phoenix, than I do LA because of availability concerns, and I debated having Luka and Kyrie higher, but again, the two-way ceiling is still very, very, very important to me, and that's why they come in at number 6.
Do you have more faith in the Mavs making a deep playoff run than the Clippers this year?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I don't. Whoa. That one's close. It's definitely.
Whoa.
It's definitely. This isn't in the top tier, obviously. It's definitely LA, Dallas, and then like Phoenix is probably at the bottom. It's tough, man. It's really, Carson. What makes it just tough is the role players. Like, we're literally, whose role players are going to play the best?
Yeah, well, that's the thing for me. It's like the Clippers are just a better basketball team. I agree the Mavs have a better duo, but the Clippers' role players are significantly better, and they have a third legitimate star by the names of James Harden. So if you were going to say because of availability, but that's kind of a cop-out. Like, if we're comparing these healthy basketball teams, I like the Mavs come playoff time, but I still think that there's a gap. I mean, the third offensive star creator, the overall defensive ceiling difference, the Clippers are better than the Mavs.
Oh, and then the rotation thing, too, is I think there's just a player that I don't want to see on the floor for all of these guys. It's like when I get Saban Lee minutes, it's like, God, Frank, can you just... Lee. It's like, Frank, can you just play Bol? Could you give Bol like some time on the court, please?
Dude, Saban Lee got like his first legit minutes.
Bro,
like
why is he ever playing? For the Mavs, it's like, bro, you guys have Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively. Why is Maxi Kleber playing?
No, those are not equivalent. Saban Lee and Maxi Kleber are
No, they're not, but
equivalent.
it's like, why is Maxi Kleber out there? And now with Russ's injury, it's like, man, why is Bones Highland playing, man? Come on. Bones did have a nasty dude. Bones had a disgusting drop-off pass out of the pick and roll the other night. That was pretty slick. Yeah, he is
Bones is tough. He may not be very good when you're talking about NBA players, but by God, is he tough. I'm not going to lie to you, Logan. I'm considering calling an audible here.
Mm-hmm.
There's something so strange about this dynamic.
Oh, you have to get Steph and Draymond on the list. You have to put Steph and Draymond there.
And PG at 6. Steph and Draymond are not going to be on my list. And I will say, bro, you are giving the utmost respect to reputation.
How can you not, bro?
Well, because it's a different time, man. I don't
know.
I'm thinking about who do I want,
man.
Apparently. And I respect that. I really do. 2016 Draymond was something different. My number 5 duo is going to be Book and KD. And I legitimately went down to the buzzer with this because what's so tough is, again, I think these are two guys who make strong cases to be top 10 players in the NBA. And I think that Book is stamped there. So maybe I shouldn't have acted so shocked when you had them at 7, because it's only a difference of a couple spots. But I think 7's too low. I think that their talent is too overwhelming to justify having them that low. But there's another duo that maybe if we were doing just in a vacuum player rankings, they would be just a little bit lower. But I do think the way that they complement each other, the way that they physically impose themselves, the two-way ceiling that they present, it just terrifies me more. It's kind of that simple. And I think that it sets you up a little bit better for that playoff environment, the different things that they do, the different ways that they dominate. God, it's tough. But okay, I have Book and KD at 5. Who is in your 4 spot?
Well, I got to get my 5.
I keep jumping the gun.
Yeah, I already talked about these guys. I already talked about these guys briefly, and they are really stylistically different to a lot of the duos. Luka and Kyrie, KD and D-Book, offensive juggernauts, going to lead out great offenses. Number 5 is a duo we've talked about, so I'm not going to spend too much time. It's Jimmy and Bam. I just think with their playoff resume, what they've consistently done year in, year out, come playoff time, and then combined with the defensive ceiling that I get with these two guys, no matter what duo that they're going to be matched up against, I have a guy that can take the other team's best offensive big man and the other team's best offensive perimeter player, and I have two guys that can effectively negate them. Obviously, with Nikola Jokic, it's not as that simple, and I think you bring up a great point with Bam's shortcomings as an offensive player. At any given moment, Bam's touch can disappear, and like you said, he's giving you 3 of 13. He is giving you nothing offensively, and that has cost the Heat in games. I mean, you can't say that it hasn't. Like, it has cost the Heat in the playoffs, and if Bam rounded out that part of his game, there would be less holes, but there's just a rock-solid defensive floor that I get with these guys and an uber-high defensive ceiling, and I can't count that out. And when you're talking about Jimmy as the number 1 guy, I talk about his apex predator status. I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm done, Jimmy. I don't have to see you do it anymore. You've done it too many times. Carson, this is a 4-game sample size that is very small, but post-All-Star break, Jimmy Butler has given us 26, 6, and 6 on 55, 60, 76 splits, 66% true shooting with 2 steals and over a block a game. Like, I just think that we're going to see Jimmy round into form as the playoffs come up, and he's going to lock in, and it is going to be time for playoff Jimmy. Jimmy buckets, man. Jimmy and Bam, and I think that they're one hell of a tough draw, and I trust them in the playoffs a lot more. And again, they complement each other. That is such a big thing to me with these duos things. You talk about guys doing different things. KD and D-Book overlap a lot in their skill sets, and they don't bring me a ton of defense. Jimmy and Bam complement each other really well when they bring me an amazing defensive ceiling, and I really do trust Jimmy Butler as a number 1 with his complete two-way value. Again, this is scaling to the playoffs. This is not regular season. I trust Jimmy a whole hell of a lot, and there's just a legacy and experience there. And I did that with a lot of the guys. A lot of my duos here in the top 5, I have seen it over and over again, and maybe this is a changing of a guard. Maybe I'm going to be wrong, and maybe we're going to see some of these younger duos that we haven't seen get over the hump, but I'm going to go with the guys that have proven it to me before, and Jimmy and Bam are one of those duos, and that's why they come in at number 5.
I get it. What's tricky for me is just like, okay, I agree about the point when you talk about the two-way value, the fact that they do excel in different ways compared to like a Book and KD. But when I just think about it straight up, it's like, I think Devin Booker is comfortably better than Jimmy Butler. I would take Kevin Durant over Jimmy in a vacuum.
You think, I'm sorry, can I confirm something too? And you think playoff Jimmy is not better than playoff D-Book? Just fundamentally.
No. Playoff D-Book has been crazy, bro. Playoff D-Book just did stuff that we haven't seen since MJ. I think everything about his shot making translates. And Jimmy goes on these insane runs. He does. And he elevates his game as much as anybody that we've ever seen. He's up there with like Reggie Miller as just the great playoff risers that we've ever seen. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? It is the pace that he plays with. It's the physicality. It's the mid-range shot making. These things that translate. But like, he is still subject to some volatility. Like, we focus so much on how amazing these last 2 runs have been, deservedly so, and we kind of just erased that in 2021 he was like awful. And he was great through the first round and a half last year, and then his ankle got banged up, so it's not totally fair, but then he really wasn't that great down the stretch of last year. So I don't know. Playoff Jimmy is a very real thing, but I don't want to elevate him to being a deity and be like, yeah, he washes Devin Booker, he washes Kevin Durant once we get to the playoffs, because I just don't think that is true. The Heat do have voodoo magic. I don't want to undersell that, but I also don't want to oversell it.
Okay.
And I do think that there's just duos out there who are more overwhelmingly talented and who lead to such great offense that I would rather have them than Jimmy and Bam, who again can like legitimately struggle there. Like the Heat offense can struggle at times, especially if they're not making 50% of their threes like they were last year, which by the way wasn't Jimmy and Bam. That was just unbelievable spot up shooting from the supporting guys. Then like we've seen several times in the last few years where they're 20th or lower in regular season offensive rating, and they do have rough stretches in the playoffs still. If I have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, that's never going to be a problem. So I have them as my number 4 duo, and I agonized over them versus Book and KD. My 3 through 5, dude, I think you can argue this order in any combination. Like, it's very close. The reason that I give them the nod over Book and KD, even though I think that Book and KD have the advantage of being a better defensive duo, like, maybe they're not great there. They're not transforming your team. But Luka and Kyrie, I think, have actual issues, which is a little bit different. And they do have the advantage of either one of them can be your number 1 for a series. Kyrie, as great a pure shot maker as he is, he's not going to do that. He's not going to be the best player on the floor in any serious playoff series. But Luka's just on a different level.
Yeah, man.
Luka can dominate a playoff series in a way that Kevin Durant cannot, that Devin Booker cannot. And I think that gap is ultimately even greater than the gap is between like a KD and a Kyrie Irving. Luka's just unbelievable. He's inevitable. He's unstoppable. The ceiling that he gives you is so absurdly high. We've seen it every time he goes to the playoffs, right? Like if those step back threes are falling at the clip that now is normal for him. This season he's made it normal to make near 40% of his step back threes. And then he also just gets into the lane at will and is a top 3 passer on the planet. Like it's just different. And Kyrie is an elite number 2. No, he's not Kevin Durant, but when you talk about pure shot making, he is still up there for the league's absolute best. And I do think these two complement each other nicely. Like Kyrie is a really, really great off-ball guard. He can make these quick decisions, quick moves, and also just as a spot-up shooter, he's phenomenal. He's a 97th percentile spot-up player, but then also 86th percentile pick-and-roll ball handler, 70th percentile isolation scorer. I just think he does so many great things to complement Luka. He shoots 45% on catch-and-shoot threes, 40% on pull-up threes. And it is just about the fact that Book and KD, as great as they are, and as much as they can be exceptions to the rule, like they're such good pull-up shooters that they're pretty much going to produce no matter what. There's a little bit of volatility there that with Luka, his floor is just so obscenely high, and his ceiling is so obscenely high. And so because of that, I think heading into the playoff environments, like if you give them equivalent supporting casts, right, if you gave both these teams good 3-and-D wings, a good rim protector and rim finishing big, I would be more terrified of Luka and Kyrie as a duo because of Luka. That's ultimately the difference, and that's kind of the theme. Most of my top 4 duos, they don't have the best number 2. They have a really good number 2, and then they have the tier 1 overwhelming guy as their number 1 because I think that that's really the most unstoppable formula. When you have that guy who just is going to dominate no matter what, and then a really good number 2, it's more valuable than 2 fringe top 10 kind of guys, in my opinion. So I have them at 4. Who is in your 4 spot?
This is polarizing. We've briefly discussed this already. This is where Steph Curry and Draymond Green land on my list, and it's really simple. You know, I mean, I think Draymond is by far Gobert is on my list, so he's more limited offensively. But in comparison to your list, I mean, Draymond would be the most offensively limited player out of anybody here. But it's like I said, with Steph, I get a tier 1 offensive player. With Draymond Green, I get a tier 1 defensive player. These are guys that impact both sides of the ball. And so it's ironic. The positives are also the negatives. We got a little yin-yang here going. What Steph brings to me offensively, he doesn't bring me defensively. What Draymond brings me defensively, he doesn't bring offensively. You know, he's just limited as a scorer. But, again, this is what I'm talking about when we get two-way value and guys that truly complement each other. You know, that matters to me. Steph and Draymond fit so well together perfectly. Draymond is going to play off of Steph and amplify what he does and make everything else go. And Draymond is going to make him better the way Steph makes Draymond better. And Dre is going to make up for Steph's shortcomings, and Steph is going to make up for Dre's shortcomings. I just think it works, and we've seen it work for so long. And I understand the Golden State Warriors because you could make an argument too. I understand you could make an argument like Boston. It's like Tatum and Porzingis aren't going to be higher on my list because they're a great team. And you could make the argument that Steph and Durant aren't going to be higher on my list because this has been a great team for so long. But I just think that I've seen it too many times in the playoffs. They complement each other so well, and these guys impact both sides of the ball. For me, they're just too experienced. They're too successful. I've seen it too many times, and they really complement each other. That's a huge aspect of this for me, is like Steph and Draymond are peanut butter and jelly, man, or whatever. They're Starsky and Hutch. They're whatever duo you want to throw at. They got each other, man, and that matters to me. I still have just such a supreme level of faith in Steph Curry and Draymond Green, and I really think that they just pick up for each other where the other lacks. And I already know, like, the argument's going to be that Draymond is way worse as a number two. Steph has his shortcomings as a defensive player too. I don't care, man. Steph and Dre work together, and I've seen it too many times.
I get it. Listen, I don't like having them outside my top 10. Like I said, they were my number 11, but I just think you're maybe a little bit too attached to what they have been as opposed to what they are. And they're still great. They are still a great duo, but like there's a reason that they aren't driving team success in the same way, because neither of them are the same as they have been. I mean, and then they've been playing really well as of late. But I can't think of a Warriors team in my lifetime that could just get beaten down like they did by the Celtics. Like, and not to say that one game is a reflection, but like there's a reason that these elite teams, right? I mean, the Nuggets just dominate them. And I think part of that is Steph's volatility. I still think that Steph is amazing, but he has not been the same offensive player this year that he was even last year. The volume hasn't been there. The efficiency hasn't been there. He's pressuring the rim at an all-time low level for him. And Dre is having a really good shooting season. I still think he's an elite defender, but when you're talking about peak Draymond, you're talking about just a different level of an athlete, and that made him a better offensive player, and it made him a better defensive player. You cannot deny the resume. You cannot deny that this is one of the great duos of all time, but going into a playoff run this year, do they scare me as much as a duo of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving? No, they just don't. So that's why I have them where I do.
I understand that. I can't leave them off. A duo that I had a really hard time ranking, Carson, because I've been a detractor of this team for so very long, and I've been a skeptic. And I want to be clear about something. I'm still very skeptical of this unit, but they seem like they're rounding into better form. They have Doc Rivers as their head coach, so it will likely come crashing down at some point. I have Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard in my third spot. And a big part of that is because, I don't know, man, is Damian Lillard turning this thing around, Carson?
He's had one really good game, but
I'm wondering. I don't know. The Clippers game was really impressive, especially with what he was doing. He looked younger. Yeah, I can't really explain. It gave me just flashbacks of young Dame where he was toying with Kawhi Leonard. I still consider Kawhi Leonard to be one of the best defensive players on planet Earth. It was kind of disturbing how easy Dame was able to get looks off against Kawhi. In pick and roll, he is just bending around guys and getting to the rack. Like, that was a real throwback Dame performance. And if we can get more of that Damian Lillard down the stretch, I'm not going to bump. This is where the Bucks are going to be in my rankings. Because of Giannis's offensive limitations and because of Damian's defensive limitations, they're not going to climb higher for me. But I don't know. If we get superhuman Dame, where he's super efficient, getting to the rim, knocking down threes, I don't think he's what he was last year. I don't think he's what he was 2 years ago, but I think he can be better, right? This has been a bad Damian Lillard. Post All-Star break, again, a small sample size, 24, 6, and 7 on 43, 40, 94 splits, 59% true shooting. If Dame's better, I can see this being a really potent duo. The offensive totality, the complementary skill sets, the fact that Giannis is so dominant as an interior force, the fact that when Dame is on and doing this, he is a complete offensive engine and scorer. They both, too, I think, a huge component of this for me, Carson. Both of them are great at drawing fouls. Like, they shoot a stupid amount of free throws together per game. I think it's near, I want to say 24 or something ridiculous like that. Like, this duo combines for 55 points a game, nearly 16 boards, 13 assists, super efficiently. The only thing that's holding them back are this group's glaring limitations. Giannis's offensive skill, Dame's defense. But it's a lot similar to what I said about Steph and Draymond. I think they complement each other. What Dame lacks defensively, Giannis makes up for. What Giannis lacks offensively, Dame makes up for. And I just think, again, these are two so complementary players that I think I have to have them in my top three. They're so talented. Giannis is in that upper echelon of number one guys that you were taking for a playoff run, and Dame complements him. So I think they got to be top three. There's just two duos I clearly like more. And there's a consistency element with my number two group. There's an aggression element with my number two group. There is a question mark with my number two group, but I believe in them, so they're going to be ahead of Giannis and Dame.
Thank God you at least have Giannis and Dame at 3.
Did you think I was going to leave them off?
When we went on Jayson's show and just did like the sort of off-the-cuff top duos, and you mentioned like 7, and you didn't mention Giannis and Dame, and then we called you out on it, and you were like, those guys suck, the Bucks suck. I really thought perhaps you had lost your mind, and I'm glad to see that you haven't. I still have them number 2. And it comes down to what I said about Luka and Kyrie, dude. If you have that unstoppable tier 1 guy, you don't need a perfect number 2. You just need a complimentary number 2 and a really good number 2. And Dame absolutely has the potential to make this the best duo in the NBA. When they made this trade, I thought, without a doubt, this should be the best duo in the NBA because Dame was coming off of a year in which he scored with career best volume and efficiency and led the Blazers to legitimately produce as an elite offense when he was on the floor with something far from an elite supporting cast. But he hasn't been that guy. He hasn't been who we expected this year. I do think he's lost a step in terms of quickness, and he's getting to the rim at a career low rate because of that. And I think that clearly he's struggled more as a three-point shooter than ever before. But I think that a lot of that is variance. The situation isn't great. Milwaukee's offense is stagnant. They don't have a guy who can really threaten the rim as a roller if they aren't involving Giannis. And so I do think that's where Dame can get lulled into some of these tough pull-up threes. And his point of attack defense has been awful. But still, what he does, stretching out a defense with his unbelievable pull-up shooting, particularly from deep, and how that clears runways for Giannis in all the ways that that leads to elite offense. Like, Dame doesn't have to be who he was last year to justify this number 2 spot. If he was who he was last year, they'd clearly be number 1. Dame just really has to shoot better, and I think that Dame is going to shoot better. And even with all these issues, even though we feel like, okay, they haven't really found their synergy, they haven't really made the most of this two-way of this pick-and-roll chemistry that they could have, the two-man game, and Dame just hasn't been good compared to our expectations. They still have a plus 11.5 net rating when they're on the floor together with a 122 offensive rating, and they're 39-15 when they both play. So if his ceiling is there, if he's on, I think that this would be the number 1 duo in basketball. And my faith still in him being good enough, close enough to the Damian Lillard that we know. Like you mentioned, what he just did to the Clippers, torching them for 41, that special pull-up shooting. I believe in that enough to where I still think they're number 2 because Giannis is the second best player in basketball, and Giannis is an unstoppable physical force in almost every matchup. And when you just need that guy who can lead you to clutch offense, who can destroy defenses with that over-the-top shot making, who can take that pressure off of Giannis, we thought Dame was the perfect solution for that. He hasn't been, but I still think he's good enough to where they should be my number 2 duo. Because again, they just churn out elite regular season success, even though a lot of the flaws have been around them. Yeah, they haven't been perfect as a duo, but more of their issues are about the structure of this entire team, in my opinion. So I have them 2. My number 3 is LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who I could have had down at 5, but I think that this feels right. Well, dude, let me tell you why that's the case. If you were just to rank in a vacuum, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, like over the course of an entire season, I think you could argue that Book and KD would be 1 and 2 on that list. I really do. But when you are talking about playoff environments, when you are talking about ceiling, and again, when you are talking about how they complement each other, LeBron and AD just terrify me. They can overwhelm teams physically, and the two-way ceiling is so high. Like, AD can basically single-handedly make you in the conversation at least for the best playoff defense. And he can play such a wide variety of coverages. He's so good in space. He's so dominant taking away the rim. He has such good hands, so good at affecting pocket passes. Like, he just does everything on that side of the ball. And then offensively, when you get aggressive AD, I mean, he feels unstoppable there too. He gobbles up offensive boards. And if you don't have a team with great size, like, he can just go through you. He can just destroy you offensively as well. And if his touch and skilled shot making is on, I mean, the ceiling is absurd. AD can look like a top 5 player in basketball. He doesn't consistently get there enough for me to give him that sort of respect, but that ceiling is there. And LeBron, in these single game environments, what we saw in Game 6 against Golden State last year, what we saw in Game 4 against the Nuggets, and now the way that he's shooting the basketball this year, where he's 40% from deep, like, that LeBron I'm talking about was with an injured foot and incapable basically of making a jump shot. This LeBron is healthy. He's still an elite athlete. He is just one of the most unstoppable physical forces while being an elite playmaker, while being a damn good jump shooter right now. They just do more different things to dominate the game. If Book and KD aren't nailing their pull-up jumpers, like, your team is just going to lose. Whereas LeBron and AD can grind teams up on both sides of the ball and overpower them. And that's really reliable. And I know that they haven't been a great regular season team, but I really don't think that has anything to do with what LeBron and AD can do as basketball players. Do they bear some responsibility for the stretch of the year where they just decided to take their foot off the gas and they sucked? Jayson, Tim, friend of the show, posted a tweet today that they were 3-10 right after the in-season tournament. Yes, they bear responsibility for that. But when you look at what they have looked like dialed in, which is what they're going to be like in playoff environments, in a Game 6 and a Game 7, it's just incredible. I do think that Damian Giannis can still reach a higher offensive ceiling. I think there is a level of ease there, of just unrelenting rim pressure that Giannis has that is on a different level, and of unbelievable perimeter shot-making Dame has that is on a different level. So I think the ceiling there is higher because, like, we do have to be honest, as amazing as LeBron still is, this duo does not have that tier 1 number 1 that is a Jokic, that is a Giannis, that is a Luka. And so that's why I don't have them top 2, even though I think the duo is incredible. But I think they belong in the top 3 still, which is incredible because LeBron is 39 years old.
And I want to emphasize, too, you say that because LeBron physically cannot exert himself at that level, correct?
Well,
I just mean
he's not as good as Nikola Jokic or Luka Doncic at basketball, and he's not as overwhelming an athlete as Giannis is. Like, at this stage in his career, obviously. But I don't think it's uncontroversial to say he's not in that tier 1.
Yeah, but I mean, I still think that when LeBron, that's the terrifying thing about LA is like what you said is, and that's why I have them at number 2 on my list. You talk about KD and D-Book shooting you out of a game. It's like the Lakers can fall asleep for 3 quarters, and guess what? In the 4th, if LeBron wants to crank it up a notch, if AD can lock in, they can. And that's what's so frustrating about this team is AD just suffocates centers. It's insane. Wemby's going to be the greatest defender I think I've ever seen because of his overwhelming physical tools. But Anthony Davis is ridiculous, man. The way he can just shut you down. He's the best on planet Earth still to this day. And so, yeah, the negatives with the Lakers, it's a few things. It's consistency, it's availability, and it's aggression. And that's the thing. The Lakers' ceiling is maybe higher than any other duo in the league. And the Lakers' floor with AD and LeBron is probably lower than any other duo because you just don't know what you're going to get. You know? That's what makes them so hard to rank. And I prefer to think about them at the apex, at the peak of their powers, at their best, when they are fully locked in. And again, that's where you have to factor this in. That's why Kawhi and PG, consistency and availability, are at number 8. And that's why LeBron and AD, while I have consistency and availability concerns, they are number 2. That's the distinction that I would make between those two. And I just have faith in LeBron and AD. And AD is going to single-handedly make me a great defense. And when LeBron wants to crank it up, he can be that tier 2 offensive guy that can be enough to win you a game. Number 1 should be no debate, though. You want to shout out your shirt, Carson? You want to show him? Let him know.
This guy loves Jamal Murray, man.
This guy loves Jamal Murray. Carson's been rocking that thing since freshman year, man. Throwback. He was loving Jamal Murray before it was cool to love Jamal Murray, man.
Yes, sir.
The regular season averages may not be insane. 46.5 points per game, 16 boards, nearly 16 assists per game between the two, just under 63% true shooting. They're the best offensive duo in the league. They have beautifully complementary skill sets, and every single night, when they need to emphatically shut the door, the Nuggets don't play around. They just do it, man. And God, man, it was, as a basketball fan, I don't know how to phrase this, man. I don't want to get graphic or grotesque, so I'm not.
Oh.
That ending possession against the Los Angeles Lakers was so beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Where Jamal backs down Reeves for 14 seconds, trickles the shot clock down to 10, kicks it over to Jokic after the screen. They get the switch. Jokic on AR at the elbow at the free throw line with about 7 seconds. And you just see it coming. You're like, oh, man. The Nuggets are going to close this thing out. Jokic is going to hit a little baby hook. And he does. It happens exactly how we expected. Bam, bam, bam. Backs Reeves down. A little 3 dribbles. Turn around into a baby hook. Help side defender on Gordon slides. Lob to Aaron Gordon. It was man, that's what you watch ball for, man, as a basketball fan. That possession right there, that play, beautifully executed, flawless, perfect. And they've been doing this for 3 years, man. Consistently. That two-man game offensively is unstoppable. And down the stretch of any playoff game, of any big moment, I'm banking on them doing it. Jamal and Jokic are they fit like a glove together. And the only argument that I could even conceive of you is going, oh, they don't have that top-tier defensive guy. That's why I'd have AD and LeBron over him. That's why I'd have Giannis and Dame over him. That's the only argument I'd accept, and it still isn't good enough for me to counteract the overwhelming offensive advantage that this duo has. They are the best offensive duo in the league, and they're not lackadaisical defensively. Jokic anchors the glass. Jokic is a legitimately good defender. He is strong. He has great hands, and Jamal tries, man. Jamal plays hard, so I don't want to hear a defensive argument. Like, they are just so complementary to one another, and they are unstoppable offensively in the clutch. They've been doing it consistently, and like that possession that I talk about against the Lakers is just a microcosm of what I mean. It's just that they are so experienced, and they have done this for so long. It wasn't a thought. You know what I mean? That's when the best players. This is a really obscure reference. Carson, do you remember semi-pro when they trade for Ed Monix and they run the puke?
They traded a washing machine for him, correct?
They traded a washing machine for Ed Monix, man. They get Woody Harrelson, and Ed Monix, the first day in, comes in, and he starts coaching the team because they need him, and they run the puke. The reason they run the puke is he wants to hardwire the end of the play game into their brains. And that's what you have to do as a great athlete, is it's like the great athletes, when the game gets tired and they're worn out, it's not, they don't think about it anymore. It's the process. It's the practice that they've had. They just go into, what they know. And with Jokic and Murray, it's unconscious. So, like when the Tropics go to run the puke at the end of the game, they've run it so many times, it's ingrained in them. They know exactly what they're doing because they've practiced it so much. And that's the feeling that I get with Murray and Jokic. It's just they've done it so many times over and over again. It's an unconscious level of, we don't need to think. We know what we're going to do. It's Peyton and Marvin. You know what I mean? It's in their blood. And they're the most complimentary duo, I think, in the league. And they're the best offensive duo in the league. And that, to me, is why they should be head and shoulders. And we saw it. We saw it last playoff run. That's why they are head and shoulders, to me, the number one duo in the league.
This all reminds me of my 5th grade rec basketball offense in Thailand. Fun fact. We ran the picket fence, Logan. That was our base offense, and it was unstoppable. We had a great point guard named Calvin. Shout out to him. Guy could really read the floor, and we just threw defenses into chaos. Too many moving parts to cover for a bunch of 5th graders, man. Those kids are picking dandelions. They don't know what's going on. You got one guy rolling, one guy popping, one guy going to the corner. Unguardable. That's kind of like the Denver Nuggets. Yeah, I think that they're clearly the most unstoppable and the best offensive duo, and they're the key reason that we look at the Nuggets and say, yeah, the road to the title still goes through them. Because, like Boston, they have a really good supporting cast, but it's a different level with Boston. And it is more specifically with Denver about you cannot stop Nikola Jokic. And when it comes to the playoffs, you're going to have a really, really hard time stopping Jamal Murray. And you're probably going to fail there as well. When these two play together, the Nuggets have a 124 offensive rating this year, a plus 14 net rating. Those are both the best numbers on this list. And the two-man game specifically is unstoppable. Because we can talk about everything that Jokic can do as a post-up player, how unbelievable it is. But if you just run pick and roll, you are constantly compromised. Jamal is an elite pull-up shooter. Jokic, if he's going to roll, is going to make 60-something% of his floaters. If you leave him on the pop, if you try to hedge on Jamal, Jokic has shot better than 40% from deep in his playoff career. You obviously can't switch, because if you do, Jokic is going to feast on anybody, and Jamal is probably going to cook whoever you switch on to him in space. And you can guard these guys really, really well, and at the end of the day, they are such unbelievable, pure, tough shot makers that they very well just might get a bucket on you anyways. I mean, watching Jamal, when he cares, when he wants to be great, it's unbelievable. That's why I have this shirt, and I've had it for so long. Like, he is such a rare shot maker. Turnarounds, step backs, any angle as a jump shooter. It's just special what he can do. And when you pair that with the best player alive, and also it's like, Jamal's a great spot-up shooter playing off of Jokic, 92nd percentile. He's got great feel. They just have such a great connection where, right, as a cutter, playing off of Jokic with these give and goes, he's so effective. These two are the reason that nobody can stop the Denver Nuggets. And shout out to Aaron Gordon for what he does in the dunker spot and how he enables that three-man game, right, where you help on Jokic and then he's got Aaron Gordon right there. Shout out to all the shooting around these guys that helps their spacing and also makes it impossible to blitz Murray out of the pick and roll, because then Jokic is going to dissect you with the 4-on-3, and he's got either a great athlete in the dunker spot or great shooters all around. It is, of course, a collective effort, but these two are unstoppable. It's why they won the title last year. It's why they're still my favorite to win the title this year, and I really don't think we need to say anything else about that. So, another tough list, Logan. A lot of good candidates, and we differed on this one, man. We differed on this one. Perhaps the most since I had Steph Curry as my number 3 guy going into last year's playoffs. You had him as your number 10 guy, but it's ironic because now you're the one putting the Steph Dre duo way up there. I'm the one with the Steph Dre duo just off my list. I do want to ask one more thing quickly about that, though, because I've been thinking about it. It's not about Steph. Obviously, Steph is still, at the very least, a fringe top 5 player in the league today. It's about the number 2. Would you take Draymond over Chet Holmgren today?
Yeah, I think I would. Not long term, right? There's a one-game scenario.
Yeah, this is for a playoff run this year.
Well, and see, that's what makes these duos so hard to rank, is it's like you're asking me individually. Yeah, I would still take Draymond. But it's like Draymond in a different offensive scenario, not alongside Steph Curry, probably looks like a way different player.
Yeah.
That being said...
No, but you're judging the duo.
I'm going to take Draymond.
Okay. I slightly disagree. As I said earlier, I think the offensive skill gap makes up for the defensive gap, because Chet is still an elite pure rim protector and an elite big guarding in space as well. Okay, what about Gobert versus Draymond?
Ooh. Damn, man. I'm probably taking Gobert.
Okay. I think that I agree, but that one's honestly closer for me because they both have their offensive limitations. What about Kristaps Porzingis versus Draymond?
Availability concerns.
No. Don't give me that crap. No more availability talk.
Give me
if
KP.
They're both healthy.
Give me KP.
I think KP is on a different level than Draymond right now, and that's the thing. I am one of the biggest advocates for peak Draymond, and I still think he's so good. I still think he's clearly a top 50 player, but even if you look at the 2022 run, it's like, who was the guy who most people said was the second best player in that run? It was Andrew Wiggins. And, like, Jordan Poole had to get to an unbelievable level. That's my point. It's like, just Steph and Dre can't propel you to being an elite team anymore, because they've both taken a step back. Draymond more so, I would say. And that's why the Warriors aren't a great team at the end of the day this year. That's why, again, they're scraping by, and they're good, but they're not great. Whereas some of these duos, I think, are just more equipped to propel you to being great, and they have guys who are just obviously more offensively skilled than Draymond. That's the thing for me. The year is 2024, and the Dubs are still really good, and Draymond is still really good. But, I mean, a lot of these things are on the margins, man. There's a lot of great duos in the league today. So I did just want to do that exercise because I'm just getting a little stressed out in my own head thinking about the fact that I don't have Dre and Steph here, but I ultimately do think that this version of the duo, that is correct. All right, This was a long one. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, there is plenty more Nerd Sesh content. Hopefully, we will have a video essay by yours truly out on SGA. If not later today, then tomorrow. And you can always watch our previous shows. Last week, we did a trivia time. We ranked the top 10 scorers in the NBA last week. We had Hoop Venue on. All of that stuff still relevant if you want to watch those shows on our YouTube page or just listen across audio platforms. You can follow us across social, Twitter at nerd_sesh, Instagram at nerdsesh. And if you want to join our Discord, you can do so. Talk a little bit of NBA, NFL, whatever you want with us. That link is at our link tree across our social media bios. And you can check out our merch. Logan's got the hat on, as he always does. We got the flags behind us. We got shirts, we got hoodies, all of that you can find at thevolume.com. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I have been Carson Brabber.
Matthew Spawnhour is in our Discord.
Oh my God, I forgot to mention, you have a chance to speak to the great Matthew Spawnhour. The one and only Matthew Spawnhour. I wouldn't miss that if I were you. And this has been Nerd Sesh.